Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this panel about local independent newsrooms across the world that are innovating around diverse revenue models and exploring new ways of reaching and engaging audiences. And we have a diverse set of speakers here, newsroom leaders from different parts of the world. We have Juliana Mori from Info Amazonia in Brazil. We have Musikilu Mojeed from Premium Times in Nigeria. And we have Esra Karakaya from Karakaya Talks in Germany. And then, of course, this discussion is based on a revenue roadmap. You'll find the hard copies there that has been put together by the Media Innovation Unit headed by Ryan Powell at the International Press Institute. And so, Ryan, I thought that I could start by directly jumping to some case studies, some practical applications of revenue diversification with our newsroom partners here before getting into the ideation, the implementation, and the audience mapping stages that you have articulated in the revenue roadmap. And so maybe, Musikilu, we could start with you. At the Premium Times, you're primarily an investigative outlet, and you are looking at social justice, political and economic issues, but at the same time, you've been able to forge revenue from a combination of different sources. So there's reader donations, there's sales of specialized publications around real estate and banking sectors. You've been able to galvanize support around subscriptions and also, of course, advertising. And more recently, you've been working with FT Strategies in looking at reader surveys. Could you tell us how this worked? What were you able to understand about audience consumption patterns, their preferences, and have you been able to put any of this into practice yet?
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for coming. One other thing we've been experimenting with is book publishing, which you didn't mention. So, but concerning reader-centered revenue, which we've been experimenting with, that's the latest because we've tried to diversify our incomes, from advertising, book publishing, publishing of special publications, and training as well.
Right.
So, but we think that readers, because for most of those who are familiar with Premium Times journalism, we believe that economic status should not limit people from accessing good journalistic products, content. So we decided that we were not going to put our content behind a paywall.
Right.
And so we now are asking readers. And so we started working with FT Strategies last year about a better understanding of how to implement a reader revenue model. And in fact, we first experimented with it in 2019, but we failed spectacularly. And so we've come around again to do this experiment about and we now realize that for it to be successful, you must really understand your audience very well. What kind of content do they need? What are the content that are not readily available elsewhere that they want? You must be able to engage closely with them, make them part of your operation. You must be able to, bring them in as people who can provide feedback, who can engage with your editors and reporters. So we did a survey, working with FT Strategies, which we now have a clear understanding of the kind of content our readers want, the kind of service our readers want. And that's where we are now.
So you're a bit more advanced in your you've done a fair bit of audience listening and mapping, and you have certain more defined ideas about the revenue approaches that are working for you. Now, Ryan, we've been doing our own listening and mapping and brainstorming sessions with our newsrooms at Report for the World. And among our 49 partners, we see that different media outlets are at different stages of these 5 phases that you've articulated. Some are recalibrating and trying to understand where they might be able to reach new audiences, and others are already in stages of trying out different revenue models based on services or based on flexible membership, right? And so how can any newsroom anywhere in the world, regardless of their background, because we have a lot of newsrooms that don't necessarily have the media innovation experts in-house, how can they most efficiently use this roadmap? It's a lot of information, and so could you run through those phases and how to use this toolkit?
Absolutely. Thank you, Preethi, and thank you everyone for joining the panel today. So the toolkit, the roadmap was really built to demystify some classical business subjects, questions around management, strategy, technology, revenue, costs, and bring that to a media-first context. You'll see in the roadmap that we've outlined ad-based revenue, we've looked into content-based revenue, we've looked into investment-specific revenue streams, and service-based revenue streams. In each of these revenue types, it's around 30, I believe, we analyzed the value proposition, we looked into the pricing strategy, we looked into the management strategy. For example, would you need to hire someone to take on a sales role in order to deliver an effective, for example, native advertising campaign, or and then finally questions you would ask in a strategy meeting. However, to get into this process, what we found most important was sort of starting with, asking basic questions about, what are the pain points that a media company is solving for at the very moment. And this led us to start thinking through different forms of audience research. Obviously, Musikilu had just been mentioning a few from Premium Times in Nigeria. But around the world, we're seeing media companies deliver and develop multifaceted audience research strategies up to and including one-on-one interviews, building feedback loops, doing surveys, building technology that can actually create conversations. And within that technology and knowledge management, people are sometimes able to feed off of those conversations and leverage that as information and insight to manage whether it's a business choice or an editorial choice. And some of these sort of classical prototyping and development techniques that are quite effective. So, in short, I could talk all day long about this. You can find it in the copies here, but the idea is to sort of start by asking questions, think about the most relevant information you would need to start answering those questions. This is really kind of classic human design and innovation methodology, but really applied to a media context where small, medium-sized publishers can really learn from, build on, inspire some creativity and some sort of experimental thinking around what might be an opportunity, what might be relevant to your media, to your audience, and with one caveat that we understand very well. Preethi and I have been working with media companies, workshopping around the world. Every market has a different context. Every market has different audience needs. Every market has different business opportunities. We certainly see overlap in certain strategies, right, and processes and methods. But what we want to do here is provide some tools, some inspiration, some discovery opportunities for getting the ball rolling and necessarily adapting that to the context that each media company is operating in.
Right, and Juliana, when you hear Ryan talk about these different phases, some of them probably sound familiar to you, right? At Info Amazonia, you've been sort of recalibrating who your audiences are after 12 years of really establishing an outlet that it was the first to consistently use geospatial analysis and data-driven reporting in the Amazon. Congratulations on that. And I know that you mentioned during our conversations that you're starting to move away from project-based work. What does that look like in practice, and what are some of the new areas where you've started to explore revenue?
Okay. So as you just said, like along these 12 years published, we've constructed a solid reputation based on our consistent narrative of geojournalism and innovation, and this has helped us to survive these 12 years. But we are trying to drive to step further the project-oriented fundings that are the main funding we have all along these 12 years. And we've been trying to look, well, actually in these 12 years, we also diversified our core activities, bringing besides journalism and this kind of very specific geojournalism, also getting characteristics of our activity like building networks and training because we were invited to teach the journalism we were doing. So we did a lot of sometimes voluntary, most of the time voluntary trainings for teaching how to work with geospatial data and environmental data journalism. So right now we are studying models and these two other activities besides journalism have become an important kind of revenue for the organization. So nowadays we are based on a tripod that is like the journalist production, the education, and the network capacity building. And right now we're studying how to make educational and the educational, not only project-based, but also having revenue directly from the people who are getting this education, and also with events, like directly paid events and training sessions. And also we are thinking on how to make the database we enhance to use in our stories a kind of a revenue. But it gets to something that Ryan just said, that then we have to think of the management of this new product. So we're studying and trying to plan, so this is like really sustainable to make in the medium.
And so you've started exploring a number of different areas, education, trainings, the database, monetizing that. So in order to deepen your efforts, a natural next step at Report for the World would be to convene these peer-to-peer newsrooms in collaboration with the IPI to look at how newsrooms that might be working on similar forms of revenue or similar verticals, or maybe they're at similar stages of planning and implementing certain tools for these groups to get together and to be able to systemize some of these learnings. And we're here to support those efforts and for the newsroom leaders to go back to their teams and apply the knowledge. And so, Esra, your team at Karakaya Talks has gone through this experience through the New Media Accelerator, and you've also received support from Wikimedia through a specific grant. So it's been a combination of support in your case as well, right? So maybe you could actually start with your journey, how you set up Karakaya Talks, because it's very specific in its format, and you've tried to engage new audiences and underserved communities in Germany. Could you tell us a bit about the setup?
Sure thing. I want to give it a little bit of context to where we're working. Germany is a country that has a public broadcasting station, and this public broadcasting station is funded by each and every household. Mm-hmm. And even though 27% of Germany's population is of color, these people are not reflected in these structures that they actually fund. These people are not reflected in the reportings. And this is why we exist, and I kind of want to give this info to kind of show why it's so essential that newsfluencers, like the work that we do, but also Milena Borchak, who's also based, partly based in Germany, who does her work, why it's so important that we exist. And what we do at Karakaya Talks is we produce news and talk shows for Gen Zs and millennials of color in Germany, in German. And our business model or revenue model is based on two pillars. One is a membership model, and two is a I would call it branded content, but probably you, Ryan, know best what it's called. I don't know these terms. I just know how it, like, what the workflow looks like.
Right.
Membership, what's interesting is when we started off, there was this big promise of, like, subscription, that's your thing to do. Memberships, this is how you're going to sustain yourself. And for 2 years, we've been trying and trying and trying. We did everything, I feel like. We tried so many things and it didn't work out. Yes, we do have a couple of, I think about like 300 monthly paying members, and it's great. We're very grateful for them. But we actually need 1,000 to really cover all of our costs. And after, I think, a certain kind of moment, we realized that it didn't grow anymore. We plateaued. So the assumption that we have is the target groups that we're reaching, they're rather young. They're mostly students or people who are in traineeships, people who don't have a lot of financial freedom. So to kind of go into this specific context and to build a media company based off of subscriptions, that didn't really work for us. Well, at least for, like, 300 paying members is great, but the second business model, branded content, is something that we felt like, okay, this is interesting. What happens, or what it looks like, is specifically there's NGOs that we work with. We agree on a topic. We do the research, my team and I. We do the production, post-production, the posting, the community management, and they give us a fee for that. This one is a solid one. I think this one we can also probably scale. But in order to be really financially secure, we do want to develop a third pillar. What that really looks like, I think I will elaborate later on.
Sure. And so you're looking at a combination of different models again. And Ryan, you've curated a few seasons of the New Media Accelerator. And what you're essentially trying to do is support media entrepreneurs who are looking at creative new business models and products that are really transforming the industry, right? And so what was it about Esra's platform that was interesting or attractive? And also, how did you look at the social media potential that naturally exists because she's reaching, or her team is reaching, audiences on these different social platforms?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there, explain those as well.
Yeah, on the spot. I can remember right back to the jury meeting now when we were exploring the media companies that would end up joining the new media incubator that Esra was a part of. Now, I mean, her application, Karakaya Talks, fulfilled obviously a variety of the criteria that were at hand. Obviously, it was scalable. It was reaching new audiences. They were innovating nonstop. They were, exploring all sorts of different revenue models. She came with a clear pitch. It was, I want to explore my value proposition and think about, different formats. A newsletter was, in fact, the main pitch at the time. I don't want to over-explain it. I think this is Esra's terrain better than mine, but inevitably, the way they were pushing the status of media technology, how you're engaging audiences, adapting to this new moment in content creation, which is a two-way street. I know that feedback loops may be on the agenda for today, but you can go through all sorts of tools and mechanisms, and the importance of hosting events and getting feedback from your audience on whether it's their behavior and how they use your website, or or opportunities to provide input. But inevitably social media is where these conversations happen, and to see such a strong project editorially driving and building a community, and one that is growing and growing, was for us the biggest inspiration, of course. And ultimately working with Esra for those 6 months was a real inspiration.
Right, and so having probably a defined community that you knew where they were, both in terms of the digital space, but they're also where they are situated, generally speaking, in Germany, helped you understand them, engage them, and hopefully even shape services around them, right? And that is part of what we've been trying to do at Report for the World. Is it's an ambition we have, is to create, to galvanize communities around critical beats, or in other words, to create more engaged audiences who are active, or who are actively engaging with the issues that our newsrooms are covering through these different beats. So maybe Musikilu, we could talk about the beats that we've been supporting together, whether it's diaspora focused, whether it's social justice focused. Are you seeing that audiences engage differently when there is consistent beat coverage around a theme? And let's take that a step further, and maybe the answer is no, but have you been able to create campaigns or unique membership around these beats? For example, diaspora.
Yeah, we've been working with Report for the World for 3-4 years now.
Yeah, you're the first, you're the part of the original cohort.
Yeah, so, and 2 beats, we're working together on 2 beats: diaspora, coverage, and education and human resource. And if you recall, when we applied, we said diaspora is key to us because of our membership ambition. We have millions of Nigerians abroad. These are perhaps more prosperous because when you look at the remittances that come into Nigeria every year from the diaspora, you know that Nigerians abroad are perhaps better placed than their compatriots back at home. So we now saw, and our surveys have revealed that they have better economic power and they can support journalism back at home because they remain very passionate about what's going on at home. So that's why we started the diaspora beat, and it's been phenomenal, really. We've seen, engagement, a lot of engagement on our WhatsApp platform. A number of them already write for us, they talk to us, they serve as experts to us. So now that we've gotten a number of them in the basket, now that we're going for membership, of course, a lot of them are going to be some of our first patrons, as I said. So that's really working. Then education and human resource. These are young people in school, in universities, in high schools, and people who want to get jobs, who want to change jobs, who want to look for careers, and that alone, because we want to capture the young people, the young audience, in a way to diversify our audiences. So, again, that's working. It has grown our audiences, our readership has grown, and we believe that once our membership takes off, we'll be able to harness all of these audiences into our basket. And already now we are experimenting with donation as a basis. We are experimenting with it so that when we launch, this will be a basis for us to launch our membership full scale. And we can see that these beats are helpful in terms of the donation that we are getting.
And exactly that, based on the success of this beat, we've started to look at our other countries where we operate, for example, India and Brazil, where the diaspora audiences are quite significant, right? And so what types of beats do they support? Which stories do they engage with? And perhaps we can look into more of that, Juliana, in the next phase. And so if I could ask you the same question, how has consistent beat coverage, especially with the specialized reporters that we've been supporting together, that are working on even more specific sub-themes within the Amazon context, how does that impact audience behavior or how they engage with the stories?
Well, since we, in this 12 years, we had lots of years just publishing very special reports, very special investigations that we were a year investigating and then publishing 6 stories and things like this. And since 2018, 19, when the Amazon was under a lot of pressure and political threat, we understood we should publish much more often, not only because of the quantity, but also to be able to bring this qualified, in-depth analysis of the region into the public debate much more when it is really being debated. So this has changed a lot of our audience. If before we were in a very specialized audience, made a lot by colleagues, by journalists, and by organizations, civil organizations, so a very specialized audience who...
All right.
It's the air conditioning. Yeah.
And now we are like in a broader audience.
Is that a special fire drill of some sort that I'm not catching on to?
It's crying.
Right, you're just going to have to elevate your voice now.
Okay. So now we are in a much broader audience, but still it's a very niche journalism. So people that are really worried about the forest themes.
All right.
Oh, I can keep.
Okay. Right, we were actually just getting to wrap up the session, so I suppose that's our cue, and we're going to.
We have another half hour.
Oh, okay.
Oh, we do, right?
Yeah,
oh,
it's
sorry. Yeah,
3:30,
I got
yeah.
got the hour. Okay, so let's. Can we deal with this now?
What's going on?
Huh?
Right. Okay. We'll keep that. We'll try and keep that at bay. I have no control over this. So sorry, I got so
Okay, so
that we're only on half hour at this point, so we have plenty of time left.
Okay, I'll try to complete so the fact that we publish much more now makes the engagement of our audience with our mainly with our website, but of course with social media also. Well, they're much more engaged. The audience is much bigger than it was before, and they're coming back to the website to see what we are talking about the Amazon, what is important to see about social environmental issues, and also we are being able to keep track of the subjects, because before it was like one very special piece, and now we can really we keep talking about the subject we revealed. So I think it's a much more engaged audience, but at the same time it's much broader, so it brings other challenges.
Sure. And then the next challenge is how to convert those engaged audiences into paid subscribers, right? And so, again, when you listen to these examples, Ryan, you're probably, well, at least I'm reminded of the feedback loops that you encourage among newsrooms to really understand the audiences, the sort of the brand champions or ambassadors, if you will, the engaged communities, the occasional readers. And so how does one strike a balance in this type of inquiry? Because sometimes I see our media partners getting overwhelmed or maybe a bit stagnant in the audience research phase because of being short on resources usually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, audience research, as you'll find in the roadmap, there's no shortage of methodologies that you can apply, especially for younger publishers or those who haven't spent a lot of time building data sets of information about your audience, about people's experience on your websites, on your platforms, reading your magazines. It's really just important to start small. Think about what data is most important for you. And with regards to feedback loops specifically, the idea here is to not only listen to the needs and wants of your users. This can be at the very start, focus groups, right? You find a few readers of your content and you have a conversation with them. But in fact, which would then focus on their behavior, on their interests. How are they navigating your website? How are they landing on the subscription page? What convinces them to subscribe to your newsletter? But it can also very much be an opportunity to build a closer relationship, have them provide feedback, on an input to the content that your outfit is actually creating. In terms of avoiding being too overwhelmed with the content or strapped for resources. It's, like I said, it's just important to start small. Start collecting any data. And the important point here is that once you start, you start building larger and larger data sets. You learn more about this information culturally in your newsroom, whether it's your editorial team or your management team. and it will only grow from there, and it will only be more refined in terms of what's actually useful and specific to your outlet. Of course, then you can test, how effective was it? Did it increase usership? Did it stop? Did it increase conversion? Did it stop churn, for example, in a subscription model? But of course, one thing I would just quickly like to reiterate with the roadmap specifically, we do highlight content-specific business models. That is not a relevant model in every part of the world. Building a subscription model is not necessarily the answer to your revenue needs in terms of your ability to engage with your users. Membership is also not necessarily the prescribed, solution. And the whole point of the first half of this roadmap is to think through those methodologies and, ask yourself kind of what does make sense for the market I'm in, for the users that I'm targeting, the different segments of users that I'm targeting, and only then can you really start thinking, strategically and actively about investing resources in a specific revenue type. I just see that, a lot of people start advising companies on building subscription models and membership models, because they built the technology or they think it's interesting, but unfortunately it doesn't work in a lot of places. And it's just really important to know what you're getting into before you do take a leap into a big investment like that. And it's not just an initial investment, but a maintenance cost
Right.
as well.
And so you touched upon two main points here. One is to find the most efficient way of arriving at conclusions about your, or at least defined ideas about who the audiences are, what formats or verticals they engage with the most, what keeps them continuing to consume the content, what stops them, and what turns them into subscribers, right? And so this is part of what we want to do in the next phase, but then you've touched upon another really important element which has been a roadblock for a lot of our newsrooms, which is the economic realities in their countries. So in vast countries like Nigeria or South Africa or India, where less than 20% of the population owns 80% of the wealth, public interest media cannot deliver their mission unless they have inclusive membership, right? And so even in a German context, although it is a relative, it's a different situation, and on a much smaller scale for you because, again, you have a defined community, how do you negotiate with these realities, Esra, where maybe the audiences that need that information the most are not necessarily the ones who will pay? And what are some of the new revenue models you've started adopting after the New Media Accelerator and some that you've had to abandon? And that's something you point out, Ryan, is like when something's not working, know how to walk away from that. Before you consume all of your energy.
I was just reminded back, I think in 2022, we looked at our members and we did this survey, and we found out that there's a large part of white women who were supporting us financially, which was interesting because we aren't particularly targeting white women in Germany, but because they love our content so much and because they want to support the mission that we do, they became members. So I think this is something that I thought was very interesting. But one of the biggest struggles that we always have with also building business models or like revenue models is the very small resources that we have. Even though we started the program with the newsletter product, we were like, hey, okay, cool, we have these news videos on Instagram and TikTok, and this is great, and we have our subscription model. Let's do newsletter, and we're going to scale that, and then we're going to make money with that. That was the assumption.
Right.
And we went in. And by the time we had 1,000 subscribers, it didn't take that much time, but it took a lot of resources. We realized that we would have to take resources out of our core product, put it into newsletter in order to scale that. So then that was our first pivot. We were like, okay, let's go back to our core product and go for branded content. Let's do more branded content. And we did that, but then we were like, at the end of December, we were like, okay, listen, this is not working because it looks like these partnerships are diluting our content. It looks like every single video is a partnership thing, and that jeopardizes our authenticity. We have a credibility, that's a currency, right? And this is something that we're putting at risk if we were to continue building more and more partnerships. So then we, pivoted again into looking into B2B models, and we were like, okay, let's do TikTok workshops. This is going to be the answer. And we actually are doing a TikTok workshop to kind of test it out, like at the end of June. But I think 2 months ago, we were like, no, actually, we can't put our resources into B2B again, because it's taking, again, away the resources from video production. And also what we've been noticing on top is there's an assumption that our news product is getting to the end of its life cycle.
Yeah.
You know, we have an assumption that this particular kind of format is about to die. There's just an inkling. So that means that we're like, okay, we have to innovate, actually go back to the core product. We have to innovate on our core product, redevelop what we're doing, then also on top build a new revenue model. And it's like, it's always so stressful. But I do have to say, working with limited resources, it really pushes us to focus, to be so sharp in our focus. And I think this is what really helped us the last couple of years of not spending too much money into spaces that weren't fruitful, if that makes sense.
Right, and so you're trying to find a platform that will last, an audience that will stick around, partnerships that are ethical, lots of different pivots, right? I mean, it's a complex matrix there. And so I know that you've faced similar challenges, right, especially with partnerships at Info Amazonia, given that you're looking at really critical investigations where you want to be sure that your publishing partners are people that there's no conflict of interest, so that sometimes limits you. And I know you've been eager to talk about the roadblocks and the obstacles, Juliana. I love that you're always pragmatic. You said we've started the exploration. We haven't necessarily arrived at its conclusion point, which is revenue. So if you had to think about a tool or a process or knowledge, or maybe even a specialized staff member in your newsroom, what is it that you feel you need most to be able to advance to your next stage?
I think our main challenge is in that our journalism is funded by project-oriented. So it's not a tool, it's not a person, but I think structure, how do you call it? Funding for the structure without being directed to any theme, any duration of project, and having, I forgot the name.
Core funding.
Core funding. Core funding would be like the most important thing for our journalism, not for the educational activities and the networking one. And so we are pursuing this, is still looking for grants that are open for that, but also working with some journalism associations in Brazil, the independent ones, to have a fund for journalism as a public service, like from the government and also from companies. So there are two different activities, and we've been involved into that, trying to. It's like what Paula was talking about from big techs funding journalism. But this is directly to journalism, and we think this would be a great way to fund independent journalism as it is, as a public service.
So I know what to look for in the next phase, and it makes sense. Ryan, we've talked about this, that ideally. Sorry to cut you off there, but it just reminded me that the next phase, or an ideal next phase of this this effort would be that the accelerator phase is followed by what you're talking about, which is an amount of core funding support for each newsroom, so that you can then use that towards further experimentation and actually implementing. So you need money to make money, right? And so have you, in any capacity at the Premium Times, Musikilu, been able to put money towards such an investment, saying let's invest in an amount of resources, personnel, towards a type of a revenue? Has it worked out, and where would that be if it hasn't happened yet?
Well, we've, I think basically most of our revenue sources have not, I can't say they've worked out remarkably, but they've contributed, bit by bit to our overall revenue pool. So we keep working on them as much as we can. And we are not giving up, we are experimenting. But the problem that we have as a newsroom, as you know, our core project, our core product is our journalism. And we need good journalists, good writers, good editors to produce this content for us. Now, the problem that we are faced, over time, we usually recruit our journalists from schools, from universities, and then we train them, but once they become competent, they get hired by the BBC, they get hired by the Associated Press, by Reuters. We can't compete usually in terms of salaries because they get paid in foreign currency. And then, so every single month, we lose some of our best journalists. That's the worst problem, the problem that we confront. Each time we train journalists, they spend 2 years, 3 years. When they become really competent, the BBC arrives. AP arrives, Reuters arrive, and they sweep them, and then we start all over again. That's a major problem for me and for most of my colleagues in Nigeria, and I think for most of Africa.
And absolutely, we've seen those attrition numbers climb as we expand and as our reporters sort of mature in their own career trajectories. In some sense, we look at that as success for their career trajectories, but not necessarily one for the newsroom, especially when you've invested so many years in cultivating their skills. Yeah. And so just to sort of expand a bit more also on this is tied to economic realities as well, right? The budgets are just not going to be able to compete with the BBCs and the likes. And so, Ryan, we're seeing an increasing number of flexible membership models, right? So, for example, the News Minute in India has done that with dynamic paywalls. I'm reminded of a successful program by the Daily Maverick. I think it's called Mavericks Insider, and they're one of our partners in South Africa, and it actually kept them afloat during the pandemic. Could you talk about this type of sort of inclusive, I guess, flexible membership model where you have a smaller number of audience, but perhaps their audience is for life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And maybe before I jump into the kind of dynamic paywall and the membership model, specifically to sort of talent management, and I really appreciate that you've brought that up. Talent management in media is half the battle. I know I've spent a lot of time working in Kenya, for example, and every big stage personality can bring their audience from one media to the other without having really any commitment to the news property itself, which is fascinating. And it really speaks to a phenomenon that we're seeing around the world, where I wouldn't necessarily news influencers might be a term, but big personalities who have a specialty, they have a following. For example, they're climate journalists, and they have built that beat over 10 years, and people go to them because they like them. And brands are now coming up with strategies to, better retain these types of very influential minds and personalities, and build a following that's simultaneously associated with their news property and the individual. So, the Financial Times, I know this is not the most relevant example always, but they're building mini brands, for example, where they'll have their own product suite revolving around an individual journalist. They might have a very specific beat, but this is a strategy, and there's many others out there where brands are figuring out better ways to maintain talent. But of course, if you're, if the value proposition of a BBC job and the potential career development is there, it's tough to battle with that. But to subscriptions to more membership and flexible models, I mean, in the content based revenue types that you'll see in the roadmap, we look through donations, we look through, of course, subscriptions, membership. There's all sorts of strategies where you can, convince people to support your product. Maybe you offer a different suite of products. Maybe it's an extra newsletter or access to a specific event, or there's ways to kind of package the content you have that convinces people to at least spend more money. Oftentimes, he might be in the room, but a friend from Republik in Switzerland, they've added to their membership page, at the very bottom, so it's not the first thing you see, but you can basically pay whatever you want to become a member. The idea is to be as adaptive as possible, but there's ways to sort of, with user experience design, shape exactly what that page looks like and where you present what information in terms of what they can pay, what the suggested amount is, but then in fact allowing people to be members even for €1 a year for that matter. The idea here is though to build a relationship, to have greater, more committed, more active audiences involved in your product that just to say that we're moving to an era where first-party data is becoming more and more valuable, and membership models are another way to feed into that value proposition. I could go on for hours about this, but given the state of platforms and the way that even Substack, right? I'm sure some of you have built Substack newsletters. You do not have access to very valuable user data because this is sitting in wherever Substack's headquarters are. Finding ways to own that data, to use tools that allow you to own that data is super critical. And I would say that fits with this concept of membership and dynamic paywalls. Yeah.
And if someone in the audience wants hours of your time, they can also sign up to the next New Media Accelerator, right? And so again, for the sake of full transparency, what you brought up about talent management, that's something that we would be open to trying at Report for the World to see how we can find different ways around, as you mentioned, branding incentives to make sure that the reporters stay for the full length of the 3 years and that they go on to become news leaders in the future, that they set up even more viable newsrooms, right? And so I wanted to also give the audience a little bit of time for questions that they might have for you. Please.
Very quick one. Is this online?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, the report, yes.
Yeah, there's
absolutely.
another slide after this with the QR code.
Yeah, and all of our reports are free resources for anyone in the community, and please feel free to email us with questions if something is not clear, and we'll also have new versions of the report at every season. So.
I think there's somebody.
Yes, please.
Yeah, there's one question sorry. Yeah, one question I think is for the Karakaya talks. You mentioned, a partnership with NGOs whereby they provide the content, or anyway. I just wanted to understand, is it really journalism, or is it a service providing? I mean, are you producing content for them in which, we cannot consider it as journalism?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. It is branded content in terms of and I'm going to give you an example. There's this NGO in Germany, they're called Campact, and they are a petition platform. So their interest is whenever they do a political campaign, they want to, get as much subscribers or people who sign as much people as possible. So what they do is they want people to have more awareness on certain kind of topics. So we talked, for example, on pesticides, how German companies are exporting toxic pesticides to countries outside of the EU. They pay us to do this. We do the research. We do the whole part, the whole journalistic part, and we upload them on our channels. So they pay us to do so. So it's kind of a way of agenda setting. They profit because we, as actors who have high credibility in their respective audiences, we cover a topic that others won't. So we bring a topic to our target audience that others wouldn't do. So this is what they pay us for. So basically, I guess they pay us for the access to that, to our community.
2 questions about this. You do editorially totally independent.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the other one, you advise that this is financed by someone when you publish? Is there any difference when you publish in social media that this is a report that was funded by someone?
I didn't understand the second question.
If there is a disclaimer saying that this is...
oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We actually in Germany we have by law we have to mark
Okay.
everything. We have to mark it, where if we got money from it or not. What was the first question again? Sorry.
No, if you do editorially independent.
Yes, and also I think this is a topic that we often talk about in our team. We often kind of want to set one line of like, okay, these are the companies that we work with, and these are the companies that we don't work with, or the NGOs. And it's really tough to draw these lines because oftentimes it's more about having that first point of contact and understanding that person. Because to be honest, there could be an NGO that stands for the most amazing things, but if the people that are in there, if we don't vibe with them, yeah, and we don't have to like talk about working together. So I think that's one. And the second part is we really want to, once we kind of go into negotiation, that's part of the negotiation, right? We talk to each other. We tell them, hey, this is how we do. And if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. But that is definitely a way for us to really get money and pay our people.
Now, you've talked about partnerships with other sort of non-journalistic organizations. We didn't have a chance to touch upon this, but collaborative journalism as a revenue model, which we're trying to do more of among our newsrooms across the Global South, but also to introduce them to global commissioning editors in different parts of the world. But that could be a whole session on its own. But collaborative journalism, of course, is another set of, another way of maintaining revenue. Anyone else with a question?